Here's a situation you might know well. You've heard about this incredible game countless times. It's ambitious, fairly long, undoubtedly stunning, and impactful. Players are almost unanimous in calling it excellent, with many labeling it a masterpiece. Elden Ring, perhaps, or maybe Cyberpunk, Red Dead Redemption 2, Baldur's Gate 3. Let's say it's one of those, the most recent and celebrated ones, and judging by everything you've heard, you know you're going to love it. At the very least, the thought of starting it excites you, and you have the time to play it. That's important. Yet, weeks, maybe months, or even years go by, and you keep putting it off, over and over again. You could start it, but somehow every time you don't. Instead, you jump into another game, not particularly exciting, but not unpleasant either. Tonight could be the night, but you know what? Let's just play 1 or 2 games of League of Legends or Apex to give yourself more time to decide. 1 or 2 games become an entire evening, and there you go. No masterpiece tonight. Does this sound familiar? Well, it happens to me too. In fact, it happens often. I was excited for Phantom Liberty to release so I could finally dive back into Cyberpunk, a game I had set aside not long after its launch. But since that expansion hit the market, I've spent my time playing plenty of other games. Some were nearly as long, some didn't even appeal to me that much, and yet I played them anyway. Paradoxically, the anticipation of a game, whether it's already out or not, sometimes becomes a barrier, even if it's a game you deeply want to play. It's as if it draws you in, only to push you away the closer you get. But why? Is it fear? Masochism? Are we just fickle or maybe a little stupid? Is it a mix of all these things or is it something else entirely? Let's try to figure it out. More often than not, we associate pleasure with action. Eating, surfing, traveling, playing, a lot of enjoyment is tied to the act of doing something. But that overlooks the pleasure of anticipation, which can be enjoyable in its own right. The truth is, when we anticipate something new, or even something familiar that we already love, anticipation itself can be a source of pleasure, which means that starting the game puts an end to that anticipation. Sure, you'll finally get to have fun playing, but no one is immune to disappointment. Even if the chances of being disappointed are slim, they're still there. And when faced with the guaranteed pleasure of anticipating the experience versus the potential pleasure of playing it, along with the potential disappointment, sometimes we just don't have the energy or will to take the risk. It's almost like we want to keep the game out of reach, like a fantasy we refuse to touch for fear of tarnishing it. So we slip into a kind of denial. We distract ourselves with a mediocre game or a few quick matches of Counter-Strike. And as a result, that masterpiece we've been anticipating, we don't even try it. Then there's the simple fact that everything ends. Starting a game means that one day you'll finish it, or at least stop playing it. And to avoid facing that inevitable end, we delay the beginning. The difference between the anticipation phase and the action phase, actually playing the game, is that we have far more control over the first. The hype, the anticipation, it can last for decades, maybe even a lifetime. That seems to be the case with the Elder Scrolls 6 or games that will never exist, like Half-Life 3 or Titanfall 3. But once a game exists and you start playing it, the game largely dictates its own rhythm. Trying to artificially prolong the experience by spacing out your sessions or advancing more slowly than you'd like can quickly become frustrating, or just plain boring. Pretending to take your time can ruin the experience. Once you start playing, you have to really play. The game sets the pace. From that perspective, and considering that many players have a fair amount of experience, we know that the moment we launch a game, a countdown begins, and soon enough, that countdown will end. Sure, we'll be thrilled by the game, thrilled to have lived it, deeply impacted, maybe even changed forever, but the experience will still come to a close. That's one of the reasons I haven't started Elden Ring yet. Even though it's been almost 3 years since it came out, and it was released on my birthday. I mean, come on. This game was made for me. But here's the thing, while the anticipation brings me joy because I'm so sure it will be excellent, starting it would trigger that countdown. Yes, it might last over 100 hours, but 100 hours in a lifetime isn't much. And once those hours are gone, discovering Elden Ring will become a memory. For now, it still lives in my imagination. So I listen to its music, I know some tracks by heart, but I keep putting it off. That being said, the case of Elden Ring is special. For me, it includes a third reason we put off playing games. Some titles are so transformative, so capable of changing our perspective on the world, or even ourselves, that they can evoke a very specific emotion. Fear. We might, first of all, fear change, because if the greatest games can alter the way we see the world or even change us, then anticipating that change can be unsettling. While most people adapt fairly quickly to external changes, losing a part of yourself or seeing it shift into something new is a kind of mourning. And more broadly, change itself is scary. It can be exciting when it's external, like moving to a new country or starting a new job. It can even be exciting when it's internal, as long as nothing is lost in the process. But when the change involves losing a part of yourself, it can be intimidating. Let's talk about Elden Ring one more time. Like with all those great games that seem to be universally praised, I've avoided spoilers. I haven't watched any reviews, read any analyses, nothing. But some things are impossible to avoid. Titles, thumbnails, scores, everything pointing to the overwhelming excitement from players. Based on what I've gathered from these glimpses, Elden Ring has the potential to reshape how I view video games, and as someone who sometimes struggles to enjoy games that are excellent in every way, because I can't find meaning in them, even when meaning is there. When people tell me that Elden Ring is one of those works that creates a clear before and after, I hesitate. It's a risk. A risk that's probably worth taking, sure, but a risk nonetheless. And then there are times when we want that change to happen. We want to grow, to elevate our perspective, to mature. And when that's the case, a different kind of fear emerges. The fear of ruining the experience. Because even though it's always possible to revisit a game, the first time is often the most important, the most impactful, and the more acclaimed the game is, the greater the fear of ruining it becomes. It's a paradox. By placing such high expectations on a game, we risk being disappointed, but we might also fear that we'll never be in the right frame of mind to experience it. When you're aware of your own tendencies, your biases, your sensitivities, when you have a strong intuition about a game, when you know that an exceptional title isn't just a product to consume, but rather a rendezvous, it's natural to feel intimidated. Some games feel far too important to us to be experienced poorly. And rather than risk having a bad experience, we'd prefer to avoid it altogether. But that's a mistake. And I've made this mistake too many times. By putting off playing a masterpiece for too long, we risk simply regretting that we never played it. And in the end, we'll always regret not having lived something far more than having lived it imperfectly. It applies to everything, and games are no exception.